Well, welcome back to another session. I hope you were well. This is the third in a series of conversations that I began some weeks ago, in which I started a theme that was called The Challenge to Succeed. The series was addressed towards men. The focus is towards men. The idea was a simple one, that every man has a calling. That calling is an invitation to take on the responsibility, the duties, the obligations that come with masculinity and manhood. And therefore, as part of the challenge to succeed, each man has to decide whether he is willing to pay that price, irrespective of the obstacles that he might face or the challenges that he might have to endure or experience. I narrowed it down specifically to relationships, and I made reference to the fact that if you think about relationships as having two people who have a shared goal, a shared vision, a shared mission, and therefore advancing confidently in the direction of that dream, then success should be inevitable, and the challenge to succeed should be something the man should bear the high responsibility for. I then explained that for most men in the West, this is very difficult, because most men in the West and most people in the West, we have solved the issue about survival. The need to survive was something that plagued most people in the West for centuries, until we needed each other, unfortunately, ever since the Second World Wars and the development of our societies. Relationships, the intersexual dynamics and human relationships in the West have evolved and changed. The traditional roles and responsibilities and reasons that men had in relationships have come into some challenge. Men, younger men particularly, have been raised without fathers, without role models, and so, unfortunately, they've been feminized. As a result of that, most men, and I used the reference, I said 80%, using the 80-20 split, 80% in the West, on the balance of probabilities are more beta males, on the basis that the software installation is not complete. Keep in mind, I'm using a software analogy to explain the concept. A software that is complete goes from an initial stage of design, concept, goes into what we call beta stage, is still not complete until it's fully ready and released. Most men are not, let me rephrase it in a different way. Let me state it perhaps in a manner that I and other people who have seen the prior sessions will find it consistent. You're born a male. The journey to boyhood comes as a result of guidance, development, and nurturing. The journey from boyhood to manhood comes from work, personal development, and hard work. Learning, pursuing wisdom, developing insight, finding understanding, developing awareness, transforming yourself into manhood through work. The journey from manhood to being a gentleman is a craft. You're born a male, it's biologically natural. It's unnatural to develop into man or to develop it into manhood in the West because of all the societal and social issues that we face and that we have been facing in the West. So what we've found is most men in the West, especially men born from the baby boomer generation till today, till present, went from male to boyhood, and they skipped the manhood process and moved into being gentlemen. Therefore, the installation is beta, it's not complete. The sessions I did previously, I went through a number of items. I think for those who haven't seen it, let me refresh. The 4 items I covered in the prior session, and I'll go into 4 new items for today's session. Number 1, a man who pursues you for more than a month intensively with no reciprocated investment in time, resources, affection, intimacy, sex. A man who moves or is willing to relocate, leaves his peers, family, nation, country, and particularly his garden. In other words, his work, his job, his purpose, his magnificent obsession, his vision, in pursuit of a woman or for a woman. Number 3, a man who pedestalizes a woman and who constantly wears the feminine frame, shows no emotional stoicism, cries at a disproportionate rate to her, and focuses on supporting her vision rather than his obligation and responsibility and purpose. And number 4, a man who believes in 50-50 partnership, believes in partnership rather than leadership, and wants to share the responsibility that should be his to carry. Those are the 4 items I covered in the prior session. Now, in today's session, I am going to go into 4 more items. I'll try and make it quick. Number 1, perhaps I should preface this statement. In each of the sessions that I have covered, I have made it very clear. Dating and relationships are not synonymous. They're not the same. Sometimes you transition from one to the other. You start off dating and then you end up in a relationship. And sometimes you move from a relationship back to the dating marketplace. So there are 2 separate marketplaces. The dating marketplace, which is short term for most people, for men particularly, it requires one motivation, one only, which is sex. The need to ejaculate is so strong that most men would wish and most men would want and say, do, steal, anything just to have the opportunity for sex. Short term. For relationships, I do have to say, I only focus on marriages because that's the only way you can keep the score. In the West, we've been coming up with derivatives and new ways of doing things. Civil partnerships, cohabitation. I don't put those in the same category as marriage. So we keep score simply by marriage. In the dating marketplace, the balance of power is held by the woman because she actually has and is a gatekeeper to her body, her emotions, and her womb. She decides who she gives her emotions, and she determines when intimacy begins. She also determines who she gives her body to and when sex begins. She determines who she actually brings to life, a man's seed. The woman decides. So in the dating marketplace, the woman controls the levels of power. In the relationship marketplace, now let me move back 1 step backwards. In the dating marketplace, the woman therefore pays the heavier penalty for reproduction and for things going awry. You give your emotions too soon and he plays with your heart, you pay the price. You give sex too early, randomly to too many men, and have a high body count, you pay a price. The consequence could also then be, number 3, you get pregnant. A woman is one who pays the heavier penalty for reproduction. So she actually controls the levels of power. In the relationship marketplace, unlike the dating marketplace, the gatekeeper is the man. We decide who would go on one knees, both knees, no knees for, and ask to join us in our mission, our union. And we say, well, this is our last name, you can join. The woman has an opportunity to reject or accept. The reason we are the gatekeepers as men is simply because the liabilities are much higher for us. In the West, in England and Wales, for example, or in the United Kingdom in general, the average duration of a relationship or marriage, specifically, is between 5 and 7 years. Half of those marriages end in divorce. Now, the statistics gets worse as we move the dates, ages. So for people 40 years and below, that number is trending towards 4 years. If you include people who are 60 years and above, that number trends towards 5 to 7 years. So, but we go with half. Half marriages will end in divorce within the first 7 years. In 7 out of 10 times, the woman files for divorce. She's the one leaving. In the remaining 3 out of 10, she asks the man to file on her behalf. So in 8.5 out of 10 times, the woman is the one walking away from the marriage. When she does, she gets half the assets. She gets 90%, 95% of the cases. The family courts award full custody to her. The man gets to leave his family house. He bears the responsibility and the liabilities of the whole family solely. And this is a big and, he suffers disproportionately emotionally because he cannot see his kids. Therefore, everything is liabilities, if you think about it. So the man actually controls the levels of power, and therefore he chooses who he asks to join him. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to go into the 4 items for today. I'll name them, and then I'll explain them. Number 1, a man who agrees to a double-barreled name arrangement as part of marriage. In other words, you've gone on one knees, both knees, and no knees, and said, I will take that liability. And the woman mandates that she would only accept if both parties, or if he agrees to her keeping her father's name. In other words, have a double-barreled name. That's one of the conditions. A man who, as part of getting married, agrees to a name swap. Now, I have seen these examples where, let's say that the man's name is Anthony Smith, and the woman's name is Elizabeth Evans. He agrees to swap his last name with hers, or something similar, or he agrees a double-barreled name where her father's name is the last name, and his father's name, his name, is the middle name. Any arrangement like that is an indication that you're running on the beta software, especially if you accept. Number 2, stay-at-home husbands or boyfriends. Number 3, a man raised and who subscribes to the whole concept of gynocentrism. And number 4, raised by a feminist mother and a feminine father. Now, those are 4 items I am going to cover today. Now, let me go through these items very quickly. Number 1, the whole concept of a double-barreled name. If you think about it very carefully, if a man bears all the responsibilities and carries all the liabilities in marriage, if there is a condition placed for which that condition is, remember, and I'm going to give you this example as from you might say, a Judeo-Christian perspective. You were supposed to leave and cleave. A woman leaves one father and joins to technically another father. The other father is in her husband. You leave one, you might say, chain of authority and provision, and you join to another. A man who accepts that his wife can keep her father's name whilst holding on to his, or sometimes some women who actually refuse to take a man's last name, and he accepts to proceed with marriage, means that actually you're running on a software where you're not aware of your masculinity or your manhood. Most importantly, you're not aware of your responsibility and the meaning behind her leaving her father's name and joining yours. It's not about power play. It's not as though she's been sold. It's a simple concept about responsibility. In old Aramaic and Greek, in Hebrew, whatever you named something, that was what it was. But if you named something, you became responsible for it. You became the source. In other words, you provided for that thing. You became the sustainer. You became the nurturer. You became the protector. You became the priest, the provider, and most importantly, you provided the purpose or the vision. When a man relegates that responsibility and says, no, I will share that 50-50 with another man, he is simply saying, I am not good enough, or I need another man and another man's voice in my house, in my garden, when it comes to making big decisions. Now, I am aware of people, none that I know of as friends, but I am aware of people who have got married and the woman has insisted that she will not take his last name. Here's the key thing, because she subscribes to all this feminist nonsense, on all this ideologies about attacking the traditional role of marriage and what it meant from a place of ignorance. And those men, they back away from saying, no, I shouldn't have to give this as an ultimatum. I don't believe in ultimatums. I simply believe in simply saying this is how things will go. You can join or you can leave. There's no force, there is no threat, there is no coercion. Anyway, many years ago, let me give you a good example. I got into a conversation with someone about a topic, and I was asked for my perspective, and I just simply said, well, I don't give ultimatums to people. I just simply say what I will tolerate. And you can choose to join as part of that union, or you can choose to walk away. You get to choose. But in the union, I will not tolerate dissent, a disagreeable spirit, a rebellious Jezebel type spirit, which is where this comes from. It's a spirit that comes from a place of rebellion. Any man who accepts a double barrel name, or his wife keeping her father's last name, without cause. Now, I've done a session where I talk about double barrel names. It might be worth looking at, and I give examples of causes that could be tolerated. But I'll give you one good example so you can understand one of those causes. I don't intend to go into detail, but here's one example. I met a young couple some time ago, and the wife had a double barrel name. And in our conversation, he said that she is the only child of her father. No other children. Her father is very old, and he was about to die. But before they got married, her father called him and asked, as an honor to him, in order for his lineage to continue. The father was the only child. He also had an only child, a girl. He asked the husband, before he was the husband, but the man, whether the man will be accepting to allow his daughter to maintain the middle name, which would have been the father's name, as an honor to him, recognizing that he never had a son, and after the daughter, his family name will disappear. And he was looking for a way to keep it as part of the family tree. And this young man, in this particular instance, accepted. And that's a choice he made. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just simply saying that is a condition, that is a cause where there's a dialogue between men. It had nothing to do with the woman. As a matter of fact, his wife was not aware of that conversation until he made that decision. Second opportunity could be, or cause could be, you've come from a very wealthy family, a family of notoriety, prestige, influence, power, money, and therefore, again, similarly, you want to still be associated with your father's lineage, either because there are no other men in the family and you are the only woman. But the conversation should always be between men. And you as the man, you get a right of refusal. I guess you might say first right of refusal. So that's the first. The second, stay-at-home husbands and boyfriends. I don't mind, and I don't necessarily criticize. I do think that there is a need for us to reassess traditional gender obligations. Women have been emancipated, so they are working. And sometimes for a union to thrive, what we tend to find is a woman who wants to have a high-power career, in order for that to work, she needs to find a man who is still a stay-at-home, or someone who is a nurturer and who could stay at home and look after the kids. Here's the challenge. Seldom do women, on the balance of probabilities, admire, respect, and honor those men. They might love them initially, but over time, there's something in a man. I talk about hypergamy, isogamy, and hypogamy. Women date across social hierarchies and upwards. So for that to work, she most likely is dating a man who she is, in many ways, or all terms and purposes, not equally yoked with, that she sees him as beneath her, whether socioeconomically or otherwise. And therefore she cannot admire, respect, and honor him. She might love him. But over the long term, the data suggests that such relationships always end badly. So I put it to you, most men who sit in that position normally have the beta installation. Why? These are feminized men. And these are men, and perhaps I should have noted this more carefully. In this stay-at-home arrangement, the provider protector, or rather the provider role, is transferred to the woman completely. The man has no say, and he is emasculated as part of the process. Now, and there are exceptions to the rule, one of which is both of you have shared values and complementary skills, but you subscribe to what I call the way an institution should be run. So it's like revenue 1, revenue 2, revenue 1 is 10, revenue 2 is 0, but the money goes into the family institutional pot and then it's distributed, as opposed to the person who brings home the bacon, determines and controls the rules. So men who subscribe to stay-at-home arrangements or stay-at-home boyfriends, in other words, you become a kept man. On the balance of probabilities, you're more likely to be beta. Now, number 3, men who are raised and who subscribe to gynocentrism. Now, let me state this so you can understand very clearly. There's nothing wrong in its true essence of gynocentrism. There is something wrong with the way it's been treated in the West, presently and today. Here's the reason. For many years, 40, 50 years, most men in the West were told the future is female. Most men were told masculinity is toxic. Most men were reminded that there was a patriarchy across the West that suppressed women, so much so that women need to be free. And men were raised to be ashamed of who they were and not to have standards. And men were told, you should support women, and that everything a woman thinks, feels, and wants should be considered. But if you had standards, preferences, choices, then there was something completely wrong with you. So there are some men who are raised and beaten over the head from a young age to think of women as, you might say, the cherry on the cake. These are men that the moment a woman says something, they come to their defenses. Now, many women who, not all, many women who listen to what I'm sharing, the first instance of words that come to their minds will be narcissist, sexist, misogynistic, dominant, controlling. These are words associated with men who advocate for men, or men who have a standard, or men who actually hold women to standards that other men have been held to for centuries. Women are allowed to have their preferences and standards, and when they do, they are called liberated, independent, assertive, go-getters, strong. When men assert what they want as preferences or standards, we are called and we are labeled misogynistic, sexist, narcissistic, and any other pejorative word to suppress how we see things. Why? We live in a society that subscribes to gynocentrism. It's all about women. There's something wrong with that because I've always said there are 3 sides to every coin: the heads, the tail, and the edge. Intelligence lies in standing on the edge, and so you can see both sides. But if you stand on one side and all you see is gynocentrism, woman, hear me roar. Woman, I have been wronged. Woman, I need to make up. Then that's all you see. So men who subscribe to gynocentrism are most likely beta males. Now, number 4, and I close. Men who were raised by feminist mothers, particularly stubborn feminist mothers, and in this particular instance, feminine fathers. This is important. If we go back to the starting phase of the whole movement to liberate women, it started with something I said earlier, which is, I am woman, I am strong. Then it morphed into a different focus. I am woman, hear me roar. And then again, it morphed into what we have today, which is I am woman and I have been wronged. These women had children, but raised their sons to be everything like the men in their lives that they detested, rather, not to be like the men in their lives that they detested. For example, women who never had a good relationship with a father. And when they had sons, they did everything to make sure that their sons were not like their fathers. So much so that they went to the extreme. These were women who had had difficulties with men and blamed men for everything under the sun, and therefore raised their sons to almost pee sitting down. These women have children, raise their daughters to be strong and independent, and raise their sons to be dependent and weak. We have a society in the West of softer men and harder women. You meet a woman, she looks feminine, all you have to do is trigger her or listen for a few minutes, and then you recognize that actually the software is masculine. You meet the man, a few encounters, you listen to him, you realize actually his software is beta, is feminine. Why? He was raised by a feminist, a woman-centric mother, and if there was a father in the family, the father was raised by a similar type of mother and therefore was feminized. So the boy was raised by a father who never wore a masculine frame and was never taught how to go from boyhood to manhood. He moved from male to boyhood and straight to being a gentleman, skipped manhood completely, and therefore the software installation in him is feminine, is beta, and is not complete. And these are men who struggle the most in relationships because they struggle for many reasons, but one of which is that there's something in them that is contends with that challenge to succeed. They've been programmed from a young age like a sponge. You've absorbed everything around you and everything you were taught. But there is something in you that calls you to something greater, but it's too fearful and you're too scared, which is why most of these men are always around mum. It feels so natural to run back to mother, partly because the father, who was feminine at the time, perhaps was never as present, didn't get involved with rough and tumble play, didn't take risks with the children, so you never got to see the masculine side. You never got to spend time with other men. What you saw was a strong mother who was very capable and assertive and dominant, and a father that was very weak, very feminine, not really sure about things to do. Many a times you found that it was easy to go to mum and say, "Mum, I have a problem," because she would tell you immediately the answer. And if you went to dad, he would look at mum first before he says, "Oh, what do you think?" Now, these are 4 things I want to cover in today's session. In the session that follows, I'm going to go into another 4 until we come to number 15 or 16, and then I'll provide you with solutions. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.